My name is Josh Houry, and I am the Community Relations Coordinator here at the Saskatchewan SPCA. As I mentioned earlier, this is our Animals and Emergencies webinar series, and thank you for joining us this morning. Again, I would like to encourage everybody to take a little bit of time to introduce themselves, introduce yourself in the chat, tell us a little bit more about yourself, where you're coming from today. I know we have some folks from across Canada here this morning, and maybe mention the organization that you are with as well. I would like to also thank the folks that have made these webinars possible. I would like to extend a thank you to the members of our planning committee, Ravneet at SaskPork, Marianne from the Saskatchewan Cattlemen's Association, Tennille from the Saskatchewan Poultry Council, Lorraine from the Saskatchewan Veterinary Medical Association, and Sandra and Crystal from our office at the SaskSPCA. Today's presentation is titled Responding to Trailering Emergencies. Trent Catley will discuss what to expect during a motor vehicle collision or a fire situation that may occur while transporting livestock, and what role the producer can play in assisting with the response. We will be taking questions throughout the presentation. You can ask questions in a variety of ways. First of all, you can hover your mouse along the bottom of your screen if you are joining us via computer, and you can put your question right in the chat if you would like. You can also use the Q&A feature, and for those of you that are interested and have access to a microphone, we are able to have you join us and ask your question verbally. For that to happen, you'll just need to raise your hand, again, using the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen, and I will keep an eye on that, and we will invite you into the conversation, and you can pose your question directly to Trent. And now I would like to introduce today's presenter. Trent Catley is the Director of the Emergency Response and Inspections Unit for the Ministry of Agriculture. Prior to that, he served over 30 years in law enforcement, inspections, and emergency services. Trent currently runs a few cows and goats on his own place, just a half-mile from the family farm where he grew up, and on occasion he will help out with the cow-calf operation or the feedlot. Trent has also been involved in the 4-H beef program for over 20 years as both a member and a leader. We are very happy to have Trent here with us today, and Trent, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Josh.
You're welcome.
I'm honored to be here today and have the opportunity to speak to everyone. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, can everyone see the presentation? Can you just give me a nod or thumbs up or something, Josh?
Yeah, I can see it here. If you have any problems hearing the presentation or seeing the presentation, please let us know in the chat. But from my end, everything looks like it's working well.
Okay, thanks. Well, then I guess we'll get started. So this morning, I'm going to talk a little bit about, what to do in a livestock transportation incident if it's an emergency. It's quite a large subject. So this morning, it's just going to be a quick presentation. I'm going to more just cover items of consideration. I'm not an expert in this area. I don't know if actually anyone can claim they're an expert in this area, because this is an area where there's a huge gap out there in the emergency world. But being a producer myself, being 18 years in the fire service, it is something I am passionate about. It's something I'm interested in. So we'll go through presentation, answer any questions you may have, help generate some thoughts or ideas of, as a producer or as an association that you can go with, in the future to work with your local fire department. I do understand that there is some people on this presentation today that, are from outside of Saskatchewan. The legislation, the numbers I'm going to be referring to today are Saskatchewan numbers and legislation, but the situation will be very similar in other provinces. So I kind of see it, there's two areas of training that is needed for livestock emergencies. There's their training for the first responders. The first responders know how to do their job. They know how to do the extrication, traffic control, all that sort of stuff. But what they don't understand or realize is the livestock side of things. A lot of them are from urban settings, so they've never been around livestock, so they don't know how to act, to move slow, the flight zones, they don't understand that sort of stuff. And then the other training piece is a little bit what I'm touching on today, is where as an industry group or a producer, where you can, you need to be aware of what fire departments are capable of, what services they provide, and what you can do to help a fire department be better prepared. Okay, so first thing we need to do is recognize the need. Like, why do we even need training like this, or even to talk about this subject? First is pretty well every fire department within Saskatchewan does some form of a rural response. You know, even your larger centers, Regina, Saskatoon, they do have rural areas that they'll be responding out to. You know, so in those rural areas, you have your intensive livestock operations, you know, your hog barns, feedlots, dairy barns, you know, poultry facilities. You know, it could be a barn fire or just the coming and going of the traffic to and from these operations. Your auction marts, your sale barns, you know, they're scattered throughout the province. Your abattoirs, your domestic meat plants, you know, your small butcher shops. 4-H shows, livestock shows. Coming up in a month's time here, we're going to have one of the largest shows in Western Canada, Extrication. You know, there's going to be over 25 head here, 2,500 different livestock animals within the city of Regina. You know, something could happen as producers are coming and going from that show, or even within the city itself. Equine events, you know, rodeos, there's gymkhanas, mounted cowboy shooting. You know, in the summertime, there's always something going on with that. So horses are always going up and down the highway. EMS assist, you know, it could be a medical emergency on the farm. You know, the fire department, you know, the ambulance arrives on scene, but they need assistance. You know, they call the fire department for backup. You know, so it could have been, you know, someone out working cows in a corral and they get injured, you know, and the fire department needs to come in and help with the rescue. You know, they need to understand how to operate and work safely around livestock. And it doesn't just apply to livestock, you know, wildlife accidents. You know, they're a 4-legged animal, you know, the same principles apply. You know, there's this time of year, the animals are on the move, they're out and about, you know, days are shorter. You know, someone might hit a moose on the highway, the moose, you know, might go through the windshield of the vehicle, but it might not be fully dead yet. So, you know, the fire department responding to it, they'll have to know how to deal with, you know, an animal that's still alive. So a little bit, these numbers might be a little bit outdated, but just roughly for Saskatchewan, you know, there's 2.25 million cattle in the province. You know, each year, 340,000 hogs go to market. You know, you can see the numbers there. What that says is there's a lot of livestock in Saskatchewan. Just to touch on the cattle, at some point in just about every one of those cattle's lives, they're going to be on a trailer going somewhere. You know, whether it's when the producer sells the calves in the fall, you know, this time of year, it's a busy time. There's going to be lots of trucks on the road as cattle are coming back from community pastures, or they're shipping the calves, you know, to the sale barns, to the feedlots, that sort of thing. Or even at the end of their life, you know, the cull cows, you know, eventually they'll be shipped off to market somewhere. So, you know, at some point, there's always, you know, going to be animals on the road. And you have to take into consideration other species. You know, just because you see a, you know, gooseneck trailer going down the road, you know, you automatically think it might have horses or cows in it. No, we have to realize there's other species in the province that could be transported. There's wild boar farms in the province, fur farms. Who would think of fur farms? I know, for example, last year, a trailer load of foxes came from Quebec into the province to one of our fur farms. You know, they're all in individual cages, but they were hauled in just a 20-foot aluminum fifth wheel trailer. So just because you see a trailer, don't necessarily assume what the species could be in there. Also exotics. I don't think we have any more ostrich or emu farms in the province. That was a craze back in the 90s, but the odd time a circus will come through, or some type of exotic petting zoo or something like that. So you never know for sure what type of species might be in that trailer, you know, but still it's out there, the risk is out there, and, you know, there needs to be a plan in place on how to deal with that. So again, like I said, you know, we need to address, you know, emergencies because they will happen. So there's the social, political, and the public safety aspect around all of this. Animal welfare groups, PETA, there's getting to be a lot of animal activism towards, you know, the whole livestock industry. You know, even livestock shows or rodeos, you know, the protesters may show up, you know. So we want to make sure that animals are always treated in a humane way. You know, public trust is kind of the hot topic nowadays. So we want to make sure we're doing everything in everyone's best interest, in both the public, you know, the people, the producer, and for the animal's welfare. Livestock, it's a huge benefit to the province. It provides economic, educational, recreational, and social benefits. It's a huge industry, and it's very important to the province. Unfortunately, the views towards agriculture are changing, and not always necessarily for the better. At one point, not that long ago, everybody had a grandparent, at least, that was still on the family farm. But now, as the farms get bigger, more and more people are moving into the urban centers. People are losing that connection to the farm. So people they aren't exposed to the farm life or animals and that, so they don't fully understand what they're presented with. And the big thing is, everyone now has video capability. With cell phones, the quality on phones, it's so good, and people are so quick to video things. So if there ever is an incident, we need to make sure that it is dealt with in a humane, professional manner, because we don't know who could be there, who could be videoing it, and it could be shared on social media within minutes, or even while the incident is occurring. Someone could be there off in the distance, sharing it live, unknown to you. And essentially, loose livestock are a hazard. If there is an incident, that occurs on a highway or something like that, if animals escape, especially if it's at night, they're a hazard, and they pose risk to the other motorists on the highway. So a little bit just of the legislation, I'll just quickly touch on. So all fire departments in Saskatchewan are established under the Municipalities Act. And the main one there is, if you look down at the bottom, 4C, to develop and maintain a safe and viable community. That's the responsibility of a municipality. And essentially what that's saying is, I guess first, fire departments are not mandatory in the province. And if they are, it's up to the municipality to decide what level of service is provided. So what that means is, if you have an incident, say in the northeast part of the province, and an incident in the very southwest part of the province, the response capabilities of those departments could be totally different. One fire department may be able to do rescue, the other one, they may not be able to do rescue. There is no provincial standard saying every fire department must provide this minimum level of service. It's up to each municipality to decide what that level of service will be. When we're talking about service, majority of the fire departments out there are volunteer fire departments. And a lot of times you'll hear the term, oh, they're a volunteer department, so standards don't apply, or occupational health and safety regs don't apply. Well, that's not true. Fire departments, even if it's a volunteer department, they're still considered a municipal employee. And what that means then is occupational health and safety regs apply to them. So the two biggest things, and this comes out of a code of practice for firefighters, is one, the municipality needs to have a written plan in place for every incident a fire department will respond to. And then secondly, all firefighters must receive the training necessary to ensure they are safely able to carry out any tasks they're expected to perform. So if we expect fire departments to respond to livestock emergencies, we need to provide that training to them. And then the last piece of legislation I want to bring to people's attention is, under the Fire Safety Act, it says in the case of a fire and emergency that requires the response of a fire department, the fire department may take any measures necessary to address or lessen the threat to the persons or property from that emergency. So what that means is, when a fire department rolls up on scene, they're responsible for the scene. They're responsible for everyone's safety. They could limit who has access to the scene, including the police, because they are the trained individuals for public safety, the human safety. So they control the scene, and they can limit and will limit who has access to the scene. So a little bit more about the Saskatchewan Fire Service. There's approximately 400 fire departments within the province. So only 4 departments are full-time. So that's Regina, Saskatoon, Moose Jaw, and Prince Albert. Any other fire departments, they're either volunteer or composite. And by composite, it means it's a makeup of full-time paid personnel and part-time or volunteer personnel. Your composites are like a Swift Current, Weyburn, North Battleford, and Yorkton. And the remainder are 392. How that can impact is, that might determine the number of people that could respond to an incident. For example, if it's out in Swift Current, they only have 4 full-time members working at any one time. So if they have an incident and they respond to it, there's only 4 members on scene. If they need further backup, they can call more. With your volunteer department, again, it's going to be all over the board. Some departments, they'll start rolling the trucks, when the first 2 or 3 people show up. So that's all that might show up on a scene initially. Or some departments might wait until 10 or 12 members show up. Then you might have, a large number of personnel on scene. But the number of firefighters that are available to respond to an incident, that's going to have an impact upon the type of recovery or response they can do. And then of the fire department members, there's about 6,500 members, 500 of them are full-time and 6,000 are volunteer. So that's the other thing is, so most of the province is covered by volunteer departments. These people, they have busy lives, they have careers, they have families, they have all sort of stuff. So they're donating their time, volunteering their time to be of a service to their community. So their training, a lot of times it's limited to 1 or 2 nights a month, I should say. So their training, while it's professional, it's as good as the paid departments. They just may not always have the opportunity to take as much training. I just wanted to, let people realize fire departments, they have priorities. When they roll up on a scene, their first priority is life safety. And that first life safety they consider is that of the firefighter. They're not going to do something that is going to put their own members at risk. And part of it is firefighters always operate in teams. So if there's a team, 2 firefighters that are going to, say attack a fire, whether it's, go into a house or even a vehicle fire, if they're going to approach it to start putting water on that fire, there has to be 2 firefighters, a backup team to support them if they go down. So that's their first priority is, they have to make sure they're safe before they even do a response, and then after that, then they'll deal with all the other people on the scene, the other first responders, or if there's any civilians or victims or whatever. So it may seem a little harsh, but, if there's a burning house, or a burning vehicle and there's a person in that vehicle, the first firefighter on scene, they're not going to rush in there to try to rescue that person. They're going to wait till they have their partner and they have the proper backup, because that is, what they're taught is their first priority is their safety, then everyone else's safety. Then after the human safety or the life safety, then it's the incident stabilization. Once the human safety is addressed, then they'll look at stabilizing the incident, getting the fire under control. If it's a dangerous goods response, controlling the hazardous material that's leaking. Whatever the situation or the emergency is, they're going to stabilize the situation. Once they've met the life safety and the incident stabilization, then they're going to deal with property conservation if possible. That's where they might try to remove some property to save the value of it so it's not destroyed by fire or smoke or anything like that. But that's, just keep that in mind. So sometimes when you'll hear the comments, when fire department rolls up on scene and the people are yelling at the fire department, you're not doing anything. How come? We've got family members in there, our properties, burning up before your eyes. It's because fire departments have to follow these priorities. So now a little more directed to what, the presentation is. So we're going to talk about the transportation of livestock. So these are just a couple slides of these first 2 weren't in North America, but just shows, how people can sometimes be creative in hauling livestock. This one was from somewhere in the States. I'd really love to know the story behind this. Definitely that's an inappropriate way to transport livestock. But, sometimes, the uneducated persons, they're just not aware of what the regulations or the requirements are. And you just never know for sure what you might run into when you're out there. So to start with, as you said, fire departments, they need to be trained for the tasks they're expected to perform. So that's the big thing, as industry groups, as producers, that's where you can really be of a benefit to your local fire department. Some of these individuals, they've never been near a horse or a cow or anything. If you have the opportunity, invite your local fire department out to your farm. Let them just get some exposure. Let them practice moving animals around a pen, loading animals on a trailer, learning how to set up portable panels, that sort of thing. The Saskatchewan Volunteer Firefighters Association, they have 2 fire schools a year, and it's open to all fire departments in the province. But they have put on several training courses for, responding to livestock emergencies, just to allow their members of their fire departments to get some training in this area. But, as an association, that's where you can be of a real benefit. Talk to the rural municipalities, because they are the employer. Let them know you're offering this service, that they can bring their local fire departments in, just to help them understand the whole livestock industry. For when they do have to respond to then an emergency incident, they're more knowledgeable, they're better prepared. The other part to go with that is pre-planning. That's a very important part in any fire department response. But if you can, as a producer or as an industry group, if you can work with your fire department and help them develop a pre-plan, and a big part of the pre-plan is what equipment and what resources will be needed if there is an emergency incident. One of the obvious one is livestock panels. Chances are you're going to have to, if it's a rollover, you're going to have to unload the livestock, off the trailer, but you need some form of containment. Portable loading chute. If it's a liner going down the highway, you can't jump the livestock off the liner. You're going to need some type of portable loading chute. So you need to identify where they are. Various halters, livestock halters, horse halters, that sort of thing. Fencing pliers, wires, chains, lariats, straps, 4-inch wide straps, hog boards, pack boards, prods, all that sort of equipment. If it can be compiled ahead of time, I do know there is several trailers available in Saskatchewan that do have a lot of this equipment prepared or it compiled in one area. But if you can work with your fire departments, make sure they're aware of this, make sure they can access all this. And then 2, they need to know what local resources are available to them. Local producers, especially if it's your specialized livestock, your bison, elk, deer, anything like that. Very few people will have the experience of working with those types of livestock, and they will require specialized equipment. For example, elk, deer, your regular panels aren't going to work. Deer, they can clear an 8-foot fence if they're really pressured. So you'd need something with a cover over top or whatever. But you need those local producers that are familiar with that species of livestock. Your veterinarians, we'll talk a little bit more later about, chemical restraint or that sort of thing. But your veterinarians, if they're available, find out who's around. What custom truckers are available. If you have an incident, and there's still animals that can be transported, in the damaged trailer, you need to bring in a new one. So you need to find out who's available. Livestock inspectors could assist with identity of the animals. Animal protection services, they may be of assistance. I realize that they're busy and short staffed, but you make all these contacts ahead of time, find out what they are able to provide, what level of service they could assist you with, and just establish that network of people. If there's municipal pound keepers, police, RCMP, CFIA, it's easier to do all this ahead of time, establish these contacts, find out who's available and what level of service they can provide. So fire department role. When there is an incident, the first thing they do is they implement their response plan. Like I referred to at the beginning, they need a written plan of how they respond to an incident. So the first thing they're going to do when they get there is they're going to secure the scene. If it's a highway, they're going to block off parts of the highway, make sure that the other motorists are giving them, are steering clear of the accident scene. They have to establish a safe work area for the fire department members to be able to do their work. So they have to secure the scene. If police show up on scene, they can assist with that. But the RCMP, the experience is a lot of times they're shorthanded, so they may not always be available. So part of the fire department, responding fire department's resources are going to be deployed to just controlling the traffic around the incident. Fire department's going to request that outside assistance. Like I said, they're responsible for the scene. They control who does and doesn't have access to that emergency scene. So through the pre-planning, we identified all the list of possible resources that are available to them. So they're going to start requesting those resources. After the life safety, their first responsibility is fire control. If say the trailer's on fire or the engine compartment of the vehicle, they're going to control that. Extrication. First will be the extrication of if there's, the driver or any passengers in the vehicle, the life safety. And then it'll be extrication of any animals that may be trapped within the trailer. But a fire department could offer other additional assistance as well. If it's a hot day, and it's a non-emergency, I shouldn't say non-emergency, but it's an incident where the trailer may be stationary for quite a while. The fire department, they could miss the trailer to help keep the animals cool inside that trailer. They could wash off the equipment or any animal byproducts that might be on the road. So it's not just the response itself or the rescue, but there's these additional items that a fire department could assist with. So at the actual emergency incident itself, we encourage the fire departments to avoid the use of a siren. They only need to use their siren when they're exceeding the speed limit and they're responding to the incident. The siren is just an early warning device to help, get traffic out of the way. But once they've arrived at the scene, there's no need for their sirens anymore. So as a producer, if it say was your incident, you're the transporter, you had an incident, you may need to advise the fire department, you're on scene, turn off the siren. It just creates additional noise. It's going to create stress on the livestock, and it doesn't add anything to the incident. We want them to minimize their flashing lights. That being said, they still do need to keep their emergency lights activated though, because they're using their fire vehicles to secure the scene, to block the oncoming traffic. So if necessary, we want those emergency vehicles set up as far away from the animals as possible. Especially at night, those lights can be very distracting, very blinding. But again, the lights are necessary, the flashing lights, because we need to alert the other motorists, that there is an incident that they need to slow down. First, the loose animals must be dealt with first, because they're a hazard to workers and the traffic. If it's nighttime out on the highway, if we have loose animals wandering around the highway, a vehicle comes along and hits one of those animals, now we've just increased the amount of resources needed to respond to that emergency. We made the incident larger instead of smaller. So loose animals need to be contained with first. Temporary containment facilities, they should be created before animals are released, even if the trailer or truck is on fire. It's not fire that kills people or animals, it's the smoke inhalation. So chances are if something's on fire and if smoke's in there, those animals probably are already deceased. So you want to make sure, the fire department, they'll contain that fire or action it right away, but you need to contain those animals because like I said earlier, if you open up that trailer and let a bunch of animals loose out on the highway, you've just created a bigger hazard. It's a hazard to the other motorists going by, but it's also a hazard to all the other workers in the area. Live animals should be removed from the trailer before it is moved, and do not enter the trailer until a plan is in place and until it's stabilized. One of the things too, as fire department, they have to have they have to take into consideration any hazardous materials that might be on the scene as well. So this, again, if you're the transporter, if you can share this information and pass it on to the fire department. If there's a slip tank in the back of the truck or even the fuel tank in the vehicle itself, it could be leaking fuel, diesel or gas all over the roadway. So there's always the risk of that coming on fire with, from an exposed heat source or a spark. Propane tanks. Some of the horse trailers nowadays, they have living quarters in the front and the livestock portion in the back, but there could be propane tanks. If there's a fire involved, it increases the explosion hazard if there's propane tanks. So you need to make sure the fire department is aware of that. Semen tanks, the liquid nitrogen in the tank. Fire department members might not be familiar with that. If one's tipped over or something, they come across it. There's the frostbite or the chemical burns that they could sustain from dealing with that container. So just if you're aware of any of these hazardous products that might be on the equipment, make sure you share that information with the fire department. So again, it's going to be, when the fire department rolls up on scene, are they going to be doing a rescue, dealing with live animals or people, or a recovery? So the fire department, if they're doing, well, either one, if it's a rescue or recovery, if there's an entrapment, the fire department's going to have to do extrication. So the first thing, they need to determine the trailer design and the material. It's a world of difference. There's getting to be more and more aluminum trailers out there, but there's still lots of steel trailers out there. But, that's going to dictate what type of equipment the fire department can use to extricate or to, remove material from that trailer. Something as simple as, if it's a liner, fire department members, they probably aren't aware there could be up to 7 different compartments in that liner. So as a producer, you need to tell them, that they could have to possibly cut 7 different openings to get all the animals out of that liner. Or maybe the internal gates, maybe they will be able to open, but you just got to twist the trailer a little bit, it doesn't have to twist much, and then those internal gates, they won't be able to open because they'll start binding on each other. Or if you use the term to a fire department member, yeah, there's some animals up in the doghouse still, that might not mean anything to them, So if a fire department ahead of time can have the opportunity, to go through an empty liner, see how all the different levels are, the different compartments, that would be a huge knowledge benefit to them for if they ever do have to respond to a liner incident. The preferred extrication point is through the back door. This is where, the best structural integrity is, the most reinforcement. So the fire department, they'd prefer to take the animals through the back, but that may not always be possible. Depending on the configuration of the incident, the fire department might have to take them out the side, it's unknown. It seems pretty straightforward to us, but you need to tell the fire department because there's the ventilation holes, on trailers. They need to check for protruding animal limbs, a leg might have gone through or horns might be sticking out, that sort of thing. Ensure animals are not pressed against the side when cutting. When they start their extrication, I've got in a couple slides here, I've got examples of the different extrication tools. But, depending on trailers will typically flop over onto the the right side. As they're traveling down the highway, they go down the ditch, they'll flop over onto the right. So all the gravity, all those animals are going to be down on the side, possibly. They need to make sure nothing's pressed up tight against the side of the trailer. Another thing they need to be aware of, were these animals tied up? If they're going to a livestock show or something, chances are they're mostly going to be tied on the left-hand side. So there could be animals hanging in that trailer still if it's turned over on its side. This is all information that needs to be shared with the fire department and things they need to be aware of when they're assessing the scene. And when the fire department is doing, cutting its extrication hole, it only needs to be as wide as the rescue vehicle. If you're bringing in another stock trailer, whatever the width of that door is, that's only the size of the hole they need to cut open for extrication or to get the animals out. So just some examples. The first thing they got to do is they have to stabilize the incident. So they're going to stabilize the vehicle or stabilize the trailer. This can be done 2 ways. They can use wood blocks, or they might have airbags, the ones on the right there. These are just heavy, hard rubber plastic. And this is just because when they start doing extrication, using the tools, they're kind of reefing on things, it's going to start movement. So they want to be able to minimize all possible movement ahead of time. So they have to block up the trailer, the vehicle, as much as possible. And then these are some of the different extrication tools that they may use. The top one, a reciprocating saw. Below that, a rotary saw. And on the right-hand side, those are air chisels. So the reciprocating saw, depending on the size of the blade, but like I said earlier, you have to make sure no animals are pressed against the side of that trailer, because that blade could be reaching in 3-4 inches into that trailer, and as they're cutting through the metal, they have no idea what's on the other side of that trailer. And the thing with all 3 of these, they're very loud. If there is any livestock, within the trailer that's still alive, this noise just echoing off the steel or the aluminum, and just even the machine itself and the cutting noise, it's going to be very loud, and it's going to cause a lot more stress for the animals. The other tools that are commonly used, I'm sure everyone's heard of the jaws of life. That's what these are. These are the hydraulic tools. So the first two on the left here, I don't know if you can see my little arrow. Those are called spreaders. And then this third one is called a cutter. So in the upper right picture there, spreaders, they're just hydraulic, very powerful. They're not very noisy, but you use them on wherever there's hinges. And they spread, they separate, and they break the hinges, they break the contact points. And then beneath that, the cutters, they're for cutting like your posts, your structural beams, structural members. They're used for, and again, they're very powerful, but they're just used to cut things. If that's all the tools they had to cut an extrication, like if they had to cut a new doorway into a stock trailer, they would be quite a while, because the cutters, they move slow, they're powerful, they move slow, but you'd only be cutting about 3 inches at a time. So you'd just have to, manually 3 inches at a time, just slowly cut your way to cut a door open. So I just have a couple videos. I did a test earlier. The sound does not work, but that's okay. I can provide a bit of narration. But just a couple videos to give you an idea of what it's like on an emergency scene or different type of extrication, how they do extrication services. I just muted it because I get it comes through my speakers, but for whatever reason, it doesn't come through in your speakers. On that. So this one, these animals, this is not a recommended practice. There's a truck that turned over. But you can see they've set up portable panels. They're bringing in the trailer. But you can tell these animals are very fatigued. They've probably been in there a long time. They're wore out. They're very tired. You can see, unfortunately, the one didn't make it. But because that trailer is on its side, they're just trying to pull them out of that small, there you can see, they're just trying to take them out of that small opening. And that just made their job more difficult. If they would have taken extrication tools and cut up a little ways, they would have had an easier time, I feel, of getting the animals out. You can see there, but you can see how they're very tired. And it's unfortunately the sound isn't working here, but they're making a lot of noise, yelling, and that doesn't add anything. It just adds more stress to the animals. But you can see they're trying to lift them up there. But why I wouldn't recommend that way is, if the animal came out and if he was very aggressive and had a lot of life to him, they would then have a difficult time getting that rope off from around its neck. I'm not going to touch on it today, but there is emergency rope halters you can use, which are very easy to take off. You can see there, if it's done properly, if they would have had a larger opening, the animals are going to want to leave the trailer. So if they didn't have anything that's putting more pressure on them outside than what's within that trailer, those animals would come off a lot easier. Again, here's another one. See how it's staggering? It's very tired, possibly injured. But if they wouldn't have so many people around, if they would have, items blocking like tarps or wood over these panels, it'd be less stressful for the animals. And also they wouldn't be seeing those distractions and they're more likely to come off the trailer. So that is that one. So that one I said that's, non-typical behavior. Usually your animals are not going to be that quiet. You're not going to be able to work that closely with them. This one's a little more typical of what to expect in an emergency incident. Unfortunately, this one has a couple commercials we got to put up with first.
Actually, Trent, maybe while we wait for the ads, I will just remind folks that if they would like to submit any questions, they're welcome to do so using the chat feature or the Q&A feature, and you can find those at the bottom of your screen.
And this is something I hope you'd never see in Saskatchewan. This is not an approved method for extricating or doing a rescue. They have no control of that doorway, using another vehicle to rip it open. the standard practice is you use those tools as referring to open the door. But if you just wait a second here, but this one, they are creating, a nice large opening. They're just ripping the whole back door off. Here's what I referred to, the dog house. That's kind of part of the wing into the dog house. But you can see these animals, they appear healthy and okay. But you can see here, pretty quick, they'll come blasting out of there. See, this is, typically what you'd want or expect, if they have, less stress or pressure on them in front, they're going to willingly want to come off that trailer. They're just, being in a trailer is not necessarily natural for them. So if you have no distractions outside. See, like out here, it was an ideal area. It was fairly wide open, so they think they'll gladly come off that trailer. But now what was causing the distraction there was the two people at the back. And again, firefighters not wearing proper safety gear. Normally they should have their hard hats and jackets on. So occupational health and safety, they do sometimes do investigations. Like I said, even though it's a volunteer department, they do investigations for proper procedures. Again, you can see, these animals, their heads up, a little high strung, agitated. The person walking along here with the video camera, you can see that's even causing stress to them. So as a producer, at an incident, people don't think of that sort of thing if they're not familiar with livestock. You want to keep people away from them if possible. Like I said, if you have tarps you can secure or something, limit to what they can see. It'll just help make the animals calmer, which would make them easier to work with. And then there'll be another example coming up here pretty quick, which is a common, everybody wants to be able to see what's happening, what's going on. So as they're going to be trying to bring animals out of the trailer, you're going to see these firefighters here with their yellow hard hats. You're going to see them leaning over, trying to look into the trailer to see what's coming. The animals are going to pick up on that. They're going to see that. It's going to distract them. They're not going to want to come off the trailer as easily. So as, a producer, if you could just, advise fire department members, stay back, keep out of the way, the less the animals see of people. Right here, you can see this guy's peeking over. The animals see that, and sometimes that'll be enough to stop them. It spooks them, it scares them. You just want to create, or minimize the distractions as much as possible. So those are just two examples of, kind of what could occur at an incident with extrication. So rescue methods, if the animals are still alive and there needs to be a rescue done on the animals to get them out of the trailer, it can be very difficult and can be very dangerous. Chemical restraint may be required, especially if horses are involved, and it should only be administered by a veterinarian. So that's, why it's important to ahead of time establish those contacts, find out who's available, because accidents don't always happen, Monday to Friday, 8 to 5, it could be middle of the night, winter time, weekends, that sort of thing. So you need to know, is this even an option that would be available to you as a responding department? If you are going to be extricating animals out of the trailer, there is a standard out there. I'm sure a lot of producers, over the time have just used the rope, lariats, if something's stuck in a mud hole or whatever, they've just thrown the rope over the animal's head, around the neck, around the horns, whatever, and just pulled them out that way. And everything's come out fine. But that's not an approved or acceptable method, for a fire department if they have to do a rescue. There is a standard out there. It's called NFPA, National Fire Protection Association standard, but it's a consensus document that identifies best practices. And they do have an animal rescue standard. And in that standard, it says straps with a minimum of 4 inches of width must be used if a rescue is being performed on an animal. By having a strap that's 4 inches wide, you're maximizing the amount of contact surface within that animal, and then it minimizes it helps reduce the pain associated with that strap or the tension of being hoisted by that webbing. Just one thing of interest or note is a 2.5-inch fire hose, which is commonly used by fire departments on hydrants. When it's laid flat, it is 4 inches wide. So even if a fire department doesn't have the proper straps, they could still use their 2.5-inch hose, to maintain that 4-inch wide webbing contact. But this is a simple forward assist. If you need to pull an animal forward, just around the girth between the front legs, you need to always control the head of the animal, but you could pull them out forward that way. There's a double wrap, which again, you just kind of go around the chest, wrap up twice, over the withers there, come down between the front legs and feed it up through the strap. The pressure there, by pulling on it, it pulls down on that strap, so it will not cause any choking motion on the animal. There's the sideways drag. And I'm sure, if any of you are familiar with livestock, the issue with this would be trying to get those straps down through their legs. Horses are very powerful in kicking. There are special tools you can use. They are kind of like for threading a needle, but they're on, a 6-foot scale. They have rubber ends, and they're the tools used for pushing the webbing underneath the animal and through the hind legs. If you have to do a backwards drag, pull an animal backwards out of the trailer. And again, this is for if the animal's still alive and healthy and able to be moved. Or hoisting, if you happen to be down in a depression or something. Of course, you look at the personnel needed to hoist that horse up out of that depression. It's debatable whether in a rural response in Saskatchewan, whether you'll even have that many people on scene. And the other part that, that a person needs to be realistic about or to address is euthanasia. That's the humane termination of an animal's life. It's necessary when an animal is in distress and in pain. So if you have an emergency incident, the equipment or the trailer or whatever, it falls over on its side, or it could be tumbling, or it could just still be upright, but could be impact from another vehicle. It's going to cause some form of blunt force trauma on the animal, so it could be in distress, pain, severely injured. It's necessary for animals unlikely to recover. It may be necessary to ensure human safety. For whatever reason, the producer may have tried to go in there to rescue an animal or something. They may be trapped underneath, we don't know, or it could be an animal loose on scene. It may be necessary for the safety of the responders or other people. Non-ambulatory cattle or livestock shall not be dragged prior to. If an animal is injured, you can't drag it away, or you shouldn't drag it away to euthanize it. Ideally, you need to euthanize it in spot or where it lays. Acceptable methods: gunshot, a penetrating bolt with a second step, and approved drugs, which again would be veterinary use only. You need to ensure it's done by a competent person, someone that's trained, experienced for that sort of thing. A peace officer. One thing I just want to bring up here is, a lot of people think, RCMP are on scene. Yes, they do have the firearm. Yes, they are, authorized to do that sort of thing. But, that police officer, he may never have shot an animal before in his life. He may have no idea how to do it. He may be very uncomfortable doing it. Yes, they're trained on how to use firearms, but that training is just specific for defending themselves against humans. They may come from a large urban area. They may never have been around livestock. So just because there's an RCMP officer on scene, and yes, he carries a firearm, doesn't mean that person may know how to safely, may know how to properly euthanize an animal. So you might have to provide direction to them, or you might have to look at getting a different person in to do it. You have to ensure it's of appropriate caliber, make sure it's, a large enough caliber to do the job effectively and humanely, or again, a veterinarian. So recommended practices: you want to restrain the animal as necessary. You'd hate to see where you try to euthanize an animal, and sometimes just the act of doing it or whatever might cause that surge of adrenaline. The animal gets up, it's only severely wounded, and now it escapes on you. That would just be, well, one, it'd be very inhumane. and just, it would be a disaster all around. So you want to make sure if you have to euthanize an animal, that it's restrained, just if the unfortunate thing happened. Use the appropriate method. Consider aesthetic or sanitary conditions. You know, if you're on a back road out in the middle of nowhere and there's no one around, your option for euthanasia might be different than if it, say, happened downtown Regina, you know, during Exhibition Week and a trailer got rear-ended and an animal may have to be euthanized there. You know, so you want to take those considerations. If an animal is to be euthanized, there needs to be confirmation of death, you know, and that needs to be immediately. You know, if the animal vocalizes, attempts to right or self its head, it's not insensible. If you touch the eye and blinks, you know, it's not insensible. You need to be prepared, or whoever's doing it needs to be prepared to immediately deliver a second application. And then there's the removal of the deads, you know, whether it's an animal you've euthanized or just the animals, you know, deceased within the incident itself. You know, if possible, you want to leave the deads on the trailer. But additional planning in this area is required, you know, because where are you going to dispose of the deads? You know, not all landfills will take deceased animals. If the animal's older than 30 months, you know, there could be implications for transportation of specific SRMs, you know, so you might want to check with CFIA ahead of time of what, you know, would be required for permits or something like that. So you need to pre-plan for those sorts of incidents. So in summary, livestock incidents are very complex. You know, we need to make sure our fire departments are as well prepared as possible. You know, like I said, reach out to them, offer training, help get them exposure to the different types of trailers, livestock, just make them comfortable around, you know, agriculture settings. Support and work with that local fire department. You know, when you see that fire department having that, you know, fundraiser, it's because there is no provincial money that goes to fire departments. It's a municipal responsibility. So some fire departments, any equipment they have, they're responsible for raising those funds themselves, you know, so support them, work with them, because when the person phones 911, those are going to be the first ones that respond to your incident. And if you're in a rural area, chances are they're your neighbors, your friends, you know, so you want to work with them. Have a plan in place. You know, some of the items I discussed today, you know, points of consideration, you know, start talking about them, start finding answers to those questions. Call in the experienced personnel, you know, make sure you get the right person for the job, and you take it slow and you take it easy. You know, failure to plan is planning to fail. So you want to make sure you can try to think of every what if scenario and try to plan for everything possible. So there's my email address and my phone number. If anyone has any questions, you know, regarding this presentation or any suggestions or ideas, you know, I'm always welcome. You know, can answer any questions you may have. Send me an email, phone me, you know, whichever. It's a subject area I'm passionate about, I'm interested in, and, you know, I'd like to see it taken further within the province. Thank you. Any questions, Josh?
Thank you, Trent. That was very informative. Very, very informative. We only have one question so far, but again, please, if you have any questions, feel free to ask your question now in the Q&A section, or just pop your question right directly into the chat. You can also raise your hand if you would like to ask your question to Trent verbally, as long as you have access to a microphone. And the one question that we have now, Trent, is we will be uploading this webinar to YouTube in the near future for those who maybe want to go back and rewatch it. But one of the questions that we have is whether or not folks can have a copy of your PowerPoint presentation. Is that something that we can make available, Trent?
Yeah, definitely. I'll gladly share it with anyone.
Great. We can get a copy of that from Trent, and then we will send that out to all of the participants who are here today. Trent, you had, first of all, I was kind of unaware as to how big of a role local fire departments have in a situation like this. So I certainly learned a lot. And I'm wondering if you know, are there any statistics available that would suggest how many fire departments in Saskatchewan are, trained in animal rescue in this sense, and how many departments would have access to the equipment needed?
Yeah, as far as how many are trained, that is unknown for sure. I do know through the volunteer firefighter schools, I believe we were able to reach out to about 10 different fire departments. I do know some fire departments have reached out in the past and done some of their own training. There's a couple training organizations in Alberta or individuals that provide training. So I know some fire departments have reached out to them, and brought them in to do their own training. But yeah, we don't have any standard, or there isn't any standard list of how many have taken the training. I'm sorry, I can't remember the second part of your question there.
How many departments have access to the equipment, some of the equipment that you outlined? Although I guess with some of the equipment, it might just be what they have on the
Yeah, a lot of the
trucks.
equipment, like all the extrication tools and that's up to the department. If they provide that level of service, then they will have that type of equipment on that. So
Cool. We do have a question that came in here. And the question is, who is actually responsible for the animals after the accident scene has been stabilized?
well, I guess once the scene, once it's been stabilized, and once the fire department open it up or allowed other people to come in, I guess the primary person then be responsible would be the producer itself, or I guess, like, let's face reality though, what if the producer perished in the accident, then would have to have a plan, to figure out who then would take care of these animals, or what would they do. If there's a commercial trucking company, they have insurance, they usually have plans in place for this, so they take custody of the animals, like during transport, if they're transporting it, if it's a commercial company, so they could bring in another truck and outfit, to take these animals and move them on. But yeah, it's kind of one of those, it's like the fire department will control the scene, and I guess it depends a lot on, what's the health condition of the producer. Primarily the producer's responsible for those animals. Like, it might have been just a producer bringing them home, or someone's, horse they're just transporting from a rodeo or something like that. But if they're going off to a sale barn or something like that, it might be a little bit different. I'm not sure if that answered the question for the person, or so. Every situation is going to vary a bit, and try to have a plan in place, and we promote the team approach. Everyone works together.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that seems to be a theme with all of our animals and emergencies webinars that we've done so far is that, and I often think of the phrase, it takes a village to raise a child, but in this case, it takes a village to, come together in an emergency and ensure the safety of people who maybe have been affected by said emergency, but also the animals as well. We do have another question here. Do you have a sense of the incidence of accidents, maybe a percentage of all transport? And do you have a sense of whether more commercial transport versus backyard farm or domestic animal transport?
Number of incidents are very low in the province. I would guess, I'm probably guessing, but maybe 5 a year. Like, I used to work in a position where fire departments had to report to the position I used to work in, of the incidents they had to respond to, and there wouldn't be very many each year. And that's part of the problem, is why it's been so kind of low on the radar for training, is because it's something that doesn't happen very often. But when it does, it needs that response, and the fire departments need to know what to do. As far as, is it more commonly with the large commercial trucking, or, your private producer and that sort of thing? I think it's probably about an equal balance. Again, that's just kind of my own guess, speculation, because there is so few incidents. I'm aware of both happening, your liners, your large commercial outfits, but I'm aware of, a handful of ones where it's just, a private, individual trucking their, own animals, 1 or 2 animals. So it's probably about equal. There doesn't seem to be any one more than the other.
Great. Thank you so much. That is all the questions that we have so far. And one other one that just popped up. And I think this will be our last question in the interest of time. We don't want to hold people too much longer. But the question is, have you looked at the emergency rollover trailer and the equipment they contain to see if it has the necessary equipment or stock?
No, I have not. I'm aware of them, but the way it's been, I haven't had the opportunity to review one. But I'd certainly be glad to review one if given the opportunity.
Great. Once again, Trent, thank you so much for joining us today and taking us through this information. As I had mentioned, it was very informative for me, and I certainly hope it was the same for all of our participants today. Do you have any closing thoughts for our folks in attendance, Trent?
No, just thank you very much for giving me the opportunity. I hope you found some of that information useful. Take it back and apply it, and certainly reach out to me, either email or phone, because it is something I am interested in and passionate about. So thank you.
Thank you. And just a note to the folks that are here today, we encourage you to sign up for our information newsletter, not necessarily newsletter, but information on our future webinars that we have coming up. There is a link in the chat, saskspca.ca/webinar-sign-up that we encourage you to pop in and register if you would like to learn more about future webinars that we have coming up. And just to note that there is still time to register for the next webinar in the Animals and Emergency series. Alison Danilick-Ross from the Canadian Food Inspection Agency will join us to discuss amendments to the Humane Transport Regulations that came into effect in February of 2020. That webinar is taking place this coming Thursday. And if you'd like to register, please visit our website at saskspca.ca/events, and you will get all the information that you need there. Once again, thank you so much to everybody for joining us today, and stay safe out there, everybody.